morning and welcome to Morning Movie News. It is very interesting to watch Hollywood try to develop a relationship with China because there's suddenly so much money there, when at the same time China is still a communist nation. Now, of course, the first big problem I reported at the end of the summer was when China decided to not pay Hollywood the money that Hollywood was owed off of the movies they'd given China to release in their theaters. And the argument was that China had come up with another tax and was arguing that Hollywood had to pay it out of their percentage, which I believe is only around 30%. That's how much money is in China. It is worth Hollywood to put up with all these headaches for only about 30 to 35% of what they're earning off of their films in China. But also, you can see why China wants to get as much money out of this as possible because there's so much more money on their end. But anyway, it was resolved, and Hollywood is getting their finances back now. And so, of course, you're hearing all of these films that are not only featuring Chinese talent, Chinese actors to try and appeal to Chinese audiences, but they're shooting in China as well. Iron Man 3 shot some scenes in China, which, by the way, we never really saw. I think they were only for the Chinese release, which I find odd. But now Transformers 4 is perhaps the most aggressive films to date pursuing the Chinese audience. They have that reality show in China where they're finding someone to have a cameo or a small role in the film. They have not one but two Chinese popular actors in the film, and they're shooting a substantial amount of their movie in China. Not just a little scene that will be included on the Chinese release like Iron Man 3, hardcore shooting. But that's resulted in some headlines of the Transformers 4 set being attacked not once, but twice while in Hong Kong. Now, the first time apparently it was some vendors they were using that were a little bit high on drugs apparently, or very high on drugs. I guess I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, and it resulted in some really funny headlines because nobody was hurt, thank goodness, saying some zombies attacked Transformers 4 set. One threatens to hit Michael Bay with an air conditioner that he apparently lifted over his head. So that was crazy. But then there was another report that just a few days later, some other people approached a female crew member and tried to extort money from the set. And this time, the Hong Kong authorities believe these might be triad-related extortion, which is like that's the Chinese mob. So that's like pretty hardcore. If I were there, I'd be tempted to pack up and leave. But it just goes to, I think that's just the way. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody who lives in China, but I think this is kind of the way maybe business is done in China. It's a communist state. I think there's a lot of corruption. Look at the way they just tried to extort. Michael Bay, I guess, should be surprised. The entire Chinese Film Commission tried to extort Hollywood for more money with that crazy, stupid tax they came up with, and now they're doing it on a smaller scale to the film productions that go there. So I just find the whole thing crazy. But Hollywood is not deterred, though, again, because there's so much money on the line. But they're shooting in places they normally wouldn't shoot for an attempt to appeal to these audiences. And it makes me wonder if maybe some security companies might want to call up Hollywood and offer their services, because maybe this is not the most hospitable place to be. But it is a hospitable place, apparently, to show a film. So I think that's very interesting. I hope China can sort this out. I am kind of excited about this, the growing purchase power of the Asian audience, because it's not just China. Japan and South Korea are also, offering a lot of box office, but China is really, there's some belief that China could surpass American audiences in terms of the kind of box office money it can bring in, which would really tip the scales in who Hollywood tries to appeal to. And I'm just excited about maybe bringing some more diversity into Hollywood filmmaking. So I'm excited about it, but I fear for the lives of Michael Bay and his crew. All right, so that's the first story of the day. The second story of the day is that the Expendabelles is not dead. They're continuing to try and work on that, and there were some interesting announcements. Now, not only was it announced that Meryl Streep was being approached for the film, and Cameron Diaz, which I find interesting. I guess Cameron Diaz was in Charlie's Angels, but when you think of female action stars, that's not really who I think of. And also, why Meryl Streep and not Helen Mirren? Because Helen Mirren's really wowed people in the Red films. I think she's really the only reason anybody goes to those. So I find that a little odd. But anyway, I'm glad they're making it, but what even impressed me even more, Milla Jovovich is also being approached, but what impressed me even more is that the film has two female screenwriters, and also they're looking for a female director. Now, I don't know who that would be, because there aren't a ton of female directors. There are some working in television, though, particularly on Suits, and I believe Game of Thrones has a few female directors, or at least some female screenwriters, which is really great, because you'll notice when you watch the episodes that they work on, they don't you can't tell that a woman did them. They're not all women-centric and women's issues. They're just good episodes. So it would be great if someone could come up from there, because I think the only Catherine Bigelow and then is really the only major female director working right now. Of course, they could go back and get Mimi Leder, but Mimi Leder's films never were really big hits. So even when she was working, so I would maybe get a new up-and-coming female talent, and it would be a great opportunity for them. So I just think it's cool. It's not just putting women on display for everyone to go and watch, but it's a movie made by women as well. And I wouldn't say this should be the case all the time. I don't want to create competing film industries of women versus men, but I think for something called the Expendabelles, it's a nice stunt. I would support that. All right, so that's the second story of the day. The third story is that the Mortal Instruments sequel has been greenlit again. Some of you have been asking me to talk about this. I'm happy to report it. Apparently you should be very happy, fans who've asked me to talk about it, because it was the fans who got this sequel re-greenlit. Of course, after the film had not done well at the box office, even though Sony had given a green light, they retracted it. They were not going to move forward with the sequel. But the response from fans was so positive that the production company, I believe it's Constantine Films, and Sony have decided, well, I don't know if it's going to go back to Sony. That hasn't been officially announced. But they said, well, you know what, maybe we didn't mess up with the movie. Maybe we messed up with the release date. I would agree. I think August is a tough time now all of a sudden. It used to be a great place for movies to drop, but not anymore. And they also said the marketing. And I would agree. I think the marketing was very poor. And they said, they admitted that they only targeted the teen demographic when a lot of the fans of the books, the City of the Mortal Instruments books, City of Bones, the sequel will be City of Ashes, are older. As I said in my review, I was pleasantly surprised by this movie. I liked it. It comes out on DVD and probably on demand December 3rd. Probably on demand maybe a little earlier. And I would really recommend trying it out. I think it had very good world building. I was really impressed with the cast. I agree with some of the fan comments I've seen online. Don't replace the cast. The cast works. They just weren't supported by a good ad campaign that really showed off that the film wasn't a Twilight ripoff, but was more in line with these really great genre television shows. But at the same time, I always complain about this. It didn't have television lighting or film shot or camera shots. It was very cinematic. I liked the movie a lot. I highly recommend you give it a shot for the much cheaper rate of renting it or streaming it, and it will be out in December. So give it a try, and then you'll be caught up for when this sequel comes out. So I'm also curious for you Mortal Instruments fans, and maybe for those of you who didn't see it, what would you like to see in the advertising? What would convince you to go that you didn't see the first time around? And for those of you who saw it, were you equally surprised like me? And why do you want to see a sequel? So those are the three stories of the day. Today's viewer question is from Fletcher Saurus. That's a great name. Fletcher Saurus says, question, we're spending a lot of time talking about the big three Justice League heroes, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. Very true. Seeing as the Justice League, even at its most skeletal level, consists of several more, including Hawkgirl, one of my favorites from the animated series, Green Lantern, please be Jon Stewart, agreed, Flash, Martian Manhunter, and tentatively Aquaman. I love Fletcher Saurus that you just gave the roster from the animated series, which is my favorite incarnation of the Justice League, with the exception of Aquaman not really being there that often. But Fletcher Saurus goes on to ask, when do you think these characters need to be introduced into the DC cinematic universe? Great question. That's why I picked it. I feel, Fletcher Saurus, and everybody else who's interested in this, that these characters should be introduced in the bigger films, just like Black Widow was introduced in Iron Man 2, and Hawkeye was, teased in the Thor film, the first Thor. I feel it's really important, and Falcon and Captain America too. I feel it's great to bring these characters in and sample them in the bigger films. And they might be doing that with Wonder Woman in Man of Steel too, although I feel it's going to be Supergirl, but there's some question as to who it'll be. But I feel you need to test them out in these like surefire films and see how they click. I think that's a very effective way, because also you never know who's going to click. Look at Loki. Who would have guessed that Loki would be as popular as Loki is? And also on a side note, one of you asked me in the comments why I think Tom Hiddleston worked even though he's a TV actor. And I would counter, Tom Hiddleston really wasn't much of a TV actor. He'd done a series on the BBC, or I think it was the BBC, on UK television with Kenneth Branagh. That's how Kenneth Branagh knew him and cast him as Loki when he directed the first Thor film. But he wasn't an established television director, and he certainly wasn't established in the United States. That's why I think that Hollywood goes so often to British television, because it's a great breeding ground for actors. They're not long series, that oversaturate the actor. They're always mini-series usually, so that's a great place to find them. And American audiences aren't familiar with them. They are essentially a new discovery. They're coming from nowhere, even though they know that this person can act and has honed their skills on BBC television. So my rules for television don't apply to television shows from outside the United States. They only apply to TV actors in the U.S. that American audiences are already familiar with. So I would say you never know who's going to work out. I loved all those characters very much so on the animated series Justice League, and they often had more interesting storylines than the big three. I guess because I also think because those characters had already been explored, with the exception of Wonder Woman again. She always gets left out. They have been explored in their own series, Batman and Superman, the animated series, they're separate ones, and so they did a great job exploring Martian Manhunter, and I really liked Shara Hall and Jon Stewart's romance and relationship, and even Shara Hall, they had a great, event with, Thanagarian, I think that's her people, or I'm messing it up, I think that's them, but with Hawk Girl's Home World, that was some really great stuff. Really liked it. And so I think these characters have tremendous potential, but I fear that DC is going to introduce them on television instead, just like The Flash is what they're doing. And I feel that's a mistake. I feel they need to be introduced on the cinematic film level if they're going to be in the cinematic universe. All right, so that's today's morning movie news. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you'll write down below what you think of today's stories and viewer question and what you'd like to see covered tomorrow, and any questions you might have that you would also like to see answered. Thanks for watching. Bye.